Beauty from the Shelf is a podcast where industry experts fill in the gaps integral to growth for early-stage beauty founders and brands. Today, I'm joined by Mercedes Asare to talk about the professional hair care space as an opportunity for beauty brands to explore for white space. Here's a snippet from our conversation.
I think the collaboration piece is hugely important from the salon side, right? Because they are small businesses, right? So they typically are not going to have the same budgets around, marketing and driving campaigns and all of those things. And so any type of support that you can offer to be like a true business partner to them, it's going to be really helpful and really driving the business within their salon. And then if they're successful, then you're successful, right? So you, in a way, are, kind of tied to them in a partnership.
Let me tell you a little bit more about Mercedes. Mercedes is the Senior Manager for Business Development for Pureology and Mazzani at L'Oreal in their Professional Products Division. She's based in New York City and has been working in the salon space for about 6 years. She absolutely loves working in this space because it's different from the consumer side of the business, but it's still something she's passionate about because she's spent a lot of her life in a salon, either watching her mom getting her done or spending time in the chair herself. When she's not working, she's usually running around the city with her husband and her 2 kids that are 8 and 9. I was so excited to have Mercedes on the show to talk about the nuances in the professional hair care space. We talk about salons, we talk about some of the differences in how they run as a business, and also some opportunities for white space for brands that might be considering breaking into the salon space. Get ready with your notebook and let's go ahead and get into the show. But before we get into the show, I'd like to take a moment to thank the Beauty from the Shelf sponsor, the Emerson Group. Thank you to the Emerson Group for your continued sponsorship of the Beauty from the Shelf podcast. Through your support, we're able to continue to share tips and tools with early stage beauty brands and founders. Now that we've thanked our sponsor, let's go ahead and get into the show. Mercedes, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. I'm so excited to talk to you today because we've talked a lot on the podcast about food, drug, and mass channels as retail players. And I think many of us are familiar with those channels because we're everyday consumers. They're frequently shopped by people, whether it's picking up prescriptions or getting food or paper towel, everyday trips. But there's an entirely separate channel that is built out that serves the beauty industry through hair salons and spas. And I'm really excited to have you on today to talk a little bit more about salons with your background. So I'd love for you to just start off the conversation by talking a little bit about how product is sold through these channels, because it was new to me. And I think it might be new to some of the folks that are listening, but it could be really helpful for some folks that have product in this sector.
Yeah, so I can talk about, there's usually 2 ways that product is sold in the pro space. So it's either going to go through a distributor or you're going to have a direct sales force. And it just really kind of depends on the way you're trying to grow your brand. I've worked on both sides. I currently work on the brand side and we work through a distributor, which is owned by L'Oreal. But previously, I worked for a luxury hair care brand that had a direct sales force. And that was just because they wanted to give more of that, premium feel of having a rep that, only spoke to that one brand. And they had like a really high touch, white glove kind of approach in servicing their customers. So currently I work through a distributor for the 2 brands that I manage. And so there are, some upsides to that as well. But with a distributor, they typically sell, anywhere from, 20 to 30, 50 plus brands. And so you have access to this really highly skilled, experienced sales force and usually a national network or a regional network. But you are really having to work with your distributor to make sure that they are incentivized to pull your brand out of the bag when they're going in and seeing their customers.
Okay, I love that. And so when you're talking about these distributors, they're essentially selling, just to be clear to the audience, they're selling product to these salons for the salons to use as they are doing their customers' hair, right? So this could be, I think it's called the back bar, right, for salons,
yes,
which is slightly different from what we're used to in terms of bottles that we'll buy if we're buying things at the store, right?
Yes, correct. So typically they would go in and they would want to place your brand, right? So In the salon space, yes, you're correct. It's the back bar is where that's going to be all their products, their shampoos and conditioners, their masks that they're using at the shampoo bowl when you go in for your service. And then there's also stylist station product, which is going to be all of the stylers that they're going to be using to style your hair. And then if it's a salon that has a retail space, then you're typically going to be selling in retail products as well for them to have at the front of the house that they can sell as a take-home regimen for their guests as they leave the salon. So when you're, kind of like putting together an offer for these salons, you really have to understand very intimately, how they are utilizing products in their salon. So if they're not retailing, you're going to be really heavy on the back bar. So that means that you want to be really familiar with what their service ticket looks like, right? So like how much their services cost so that you can understand what's the right brand that you want to place within that salon. And I think from the brand side, it's really about understanding what your target salons are going to be. So if you have a higher end product, you are likely going to want to be placed in higher end salons than maybe not some of the mom and pop shops. So there's really a lot to think about as you're, kind of targeting what kind of salons that you want to get into within the pro space.
Well, that's so helpful and so interesting. I just love learning new things about the beauty industry. I did do a little bit of research before the podcast and saw that there are nearly 1.4 million salons in the US and that the hair salon industry brought in $51.6 billion in 2022. Mm-hmm. So as you're talking about brands selling into these salons, by the numbers, there's a sizable business here. So for those brands that are considering launching products, let's say, and might consider expanding or building their brand in the professional channel, what are some key differences in product that they might want to keep in mind that are known differentiators in the pro space versus if you're selling direct to consumer? Like you talked a little bit about a high-end salon might have a specific clientele, require specific, I'm guessing, ingredient list, but I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about what those differences might be.
Yeah. So I think, one thing from the brand side of things is you want to have a really, strong brand story. And I think having a hero product is also something that's going to be critically important in that strategy as you're going in and targeting, any sort of pro. Because I think, there are a lot of pro brands out there. There's a lot of competition. And a lot of the pro brands are also now selling in higher end retail spaces as well, right? So they're also in Ulta or Sephora or what have you. So there's a lot of competition in terms of where a guest is going to buy their products from. So why are they buying in the salon versus somewhere else? And we can kind of get into how those retail channels drive consumer awareness and how it is helpful for the pro space. But just to stay on topic, in terms of key differences, I think having that hero product that's really going to speak to the consumer that you're trying to target. And then I think also just really thinking about a niche. So right now, texture is huge, right? Everyone is speaking to texture. And so you're seeing a lot of clients that are coming in and are trying to learn how to style their hair for the first time. They've never worn their hair natural before. And so I think getting into that space is huge. And you can see it in the consumer space too, right? Like there's so many new brands popping up. But I think specifically on the pro side, it's a huge opportunity because there just aren't that many pro brands that are targeting texture specifically. It's really just, a handful of brands that have, maybe 4 or 5 curly products. And we know that they are really only targeting maybe 2 or 3 different textures. And they're typically not higher texture types. So I think there's a huge opportunity in the texture space.
I love that you're saying that because white space opportunity is something that I have a soft spot for, especially as a former buyer. Those are the areas where I'm always looking to say, where are brands doing things that we haven't seen before, or where's their opportunity? And to your point, it's like we see that there's a lot more brands popping up for textured hair in the mass realm, but that's not necessarily there in the pro space. So that is still like a new opportunity for brands if they're saying, oh, I want to go to market. This is a great opportunity if you want to, learn the pro space and understand some of those differences. You talked a little bit about how, some of these pro brands are still at like an Ulta and Sephora, but then they also might be selling at these salons. Do you think there's differences in how these brands are marketing themselves when they are talking to the salon versus talking to an Ulta or a Sephora? Are the consumers the same in both of those places? Or how might there be differences? We'd love for you to just touch on that, however you kind of receive that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think ultimately the end user is going to be the same, right? But I think the way that it's sold in to the pro space is going to be different because you're speaking to a pro who is going to have much more intimate knowledge about the products and the ingredients and how they work. And they really want to understand how it's going to benefit their business versus, a larger retailer. So ultimately, it's going to end up in the hands of the consumer. But I think going into a salon space and purchasing, your retail from your stylist, you're going to get all of the education that you're not necessarily going to go in and get when you're just walking into Sephora and reading the back of the bottle, right? So I think, yes, there is a difference in the way that it's sold in. And I think it's just because of the audience and the fact that with the pro side, they really want to understand, yes, how it's going to impact their bottom line and how it's going to, really drive the business in their salon. But they also want to understand, kind of technically how this product is going to work. So education is critically important in making sure that the products, work properly, they perform really well, in addition to there just being some consumer awareness around it. Because it's always helpful when you have a guest who comes into the salon and, they're asking for, Pureology, or they're at, to use my brands as an example, where they're like, oh, like I really like the Hydrate shampoo, right? And so being able to speak to that is super helpful.
Okay, so as you talked about that direct selling model a little bit earlier, and you just touched it just now, it sounds like the stylist does play a role in educating that consumer then about the product that they're using. And then also that the salon kind of plays a role as well. Do you think that that generates more brand loyalty? Like you kind of mentioned that a guest might come in and ask for that product specifically. Is that something that you might see in the salon sector where you see folks have a lot more either brand loyalty or they're just more knowledgeable about the products because they are getting that education from the salon and the stylist? Can you talk a little bit about like those roles that those folks play in the pro space?
So, yeah, I mean, I think that having that education, it's going to help. I mean, the stylist is really the expert, right? And I think it helps position them in a way that continues to make them feel like the expert and gives the perception of them being the expert to their guests as they're coming into the salon. But I think also with like that consumer awareness of the brand, we're all on our phones at night, like scrolling TikTok, right? Like, I mean, I know I am, right? So you're constantly having, products or, even like hair tutorials, right? Where somebody is just like, oh, like I styled my hair this way. And so I think being able to go into the salon and be like, hey, like I saw this style on TikTok and like I really want to try this with my hair. And then they can equip you with the products and that education on how to use them. It's really going to help drive the business in the salon.
I'm wondering, do you think that the salon help the stylist in that sell-in? Or are they kind of doing something different? Like I think when I go and I get my lashes done, right? Mm-hmm. Typically, the person that's at the front desk is selling me, products to clean my lashes and the things that I can do to make sure I'm maintaining it, which is a little bit different than what my lash technician, right? What she's actually doing, which is more so just saying, okay, your lashes look healthy. This might be some things that you're doing. So there's somewhat synergy, but do you think on the hair side, are the stylists in the salon, like, do they have the same goals? Or is the salon more so trying to sell more product to say, hey, this is an opportunity for us to increase revenue and increase sales, whereas the stylist is more so focused on, that head of hair, if you will?
Yeah. So I think it depends, right? It depends. It's definitely going to change from salon to salon. I find that the salons that are the most successful are the ones that do have alignment, right? So everybody is aligned on what the strategy is and how they're going to grow their business. So there are like a couple of different types of salon structures. So in a commission salon, right, you're an employee of the salon. And so you're incentivized to sell retail to, kind of upsell your service ticket. So, if that's adding a styling service to a haircut or something like that, right? So you're incentivized to do all of those things because that's going to drive up your commission that you're getting, right? And so I think that alignment is going to be key because we go into salons every day. Particularly, we're seeing a lot with Gen Z where they really don't want to sell retail in the traditional kind of way because they feel, very pushy or, a number of different reasons. But we are starting, to kind of hear that, what are some new ways that we can, kind of get our staff on board to sell retail. But I think the salons that are doing really well and that have been in the business a really long time they're aligned from the owner all the way to the shampoo assistants in terms of what the strategy is for the business and driving the business, because everybody has something to gain from it. There's also a booth rental type of model where you're just going in and you're kind of renting a chair. And that's not to say that you can't have that same, kind of cohesive business model, because I've definitely seen plenty of salons that have done it, but it just works a little bit differently, right? Because you're just renting the chair. So, you're likely paying for your own products, you're setting your own prices, like all of that stuff. So it's just a little bit different. But I do find that having that alignment between ownership and the staff is really what kind of like drives the success of a lot of these salons.
I'm curious, as you talk about even these different formats for the salons, does that mean that brands that are approaching these salons in the pro space, do they need to have a pricing strategy that's already developed? Is it similar to retail in that the stylist or the salon can still select that final retail price that they give to the consumer? Are there differences, and are consumers, let's say, aware that there might be different prices for the product based on where they go?
That's a really good one. So no, like from the brand perspective, you definitely want to have consistent pricing across the board, right? Because I think having, different prices based on, where you're placed, it's confusing to the consumer. And I don't think it really drives loyalty to your brand. It's not really helpful like to your salons either, right? So if I'm a salon and I'm selling, X brand of shampoo for $20, but I know if I go to another salon down the street that they're selling it for $18, then I'm going to get my hair cut and then I'm going to drive down the street and I'm going to go get my shampoo from there, right? Because we're all price conscious. I think being consistent in your price is really the way to go.
Okay, thanks for sharing that. I'm curious because I consistently will talk to brands, at least on the mass side, about making sure that they have the right prices for the different channels. So you might have one price on Amazon and another price on Target and another price at Ulta. But in this space and in this world, especially with those mass retailers, not that Ulta's mass, but I'll say with those retailers that all kind of talk to one another in a sense, some are going to adjust the price based on what Amazon is doing, or some are going to know, just that to your point, consumers are going to check Amazon when they're in the store.
Right.
And there have to be other incentives to buy. Like, I know I'm going to get points if I'm at an Ulta Beauty or Sephora. So I'm okay paying a little bit more there because I want my gifts and I want my rewards.
Yes,
and I'm okay with that. So,
right, exactly.
So yeah.
Like, I got to make Rouge this year. Totally understand.
Exactly. The goal is to be Rouge every year, or whatever that top tier is, even though I look back and I'm like, make it make sense. But yeah.
Exactly. It's like you spent more money to save $2. But yes, it is important.
That's girl math, and that's okay.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I think obviously if you're running like promotions and things like that, like the price is going to change. But I think, just being consistent is really going to drive success across the brand, especially when you're going to have dual distribution. If you're going to be in a big retail and then also going into the salons, the salons are the small businesses, right? And so when you go in there, you're talking to owners who this business put their kids through college, like this is putting, food on their table. And so I think, setting them up in a way where they feel like they can compete with the big box stores is really what's going to drive brand loyalty in the pro space for you.
That's really good. So do you think there are ways that brands can create beneficial collaborations with salons to drive sales? Like, are the pro brands still creating strong pages on social media? Like, are they on TikTok? Are they on Instagram and these social channels still engaging with consumers? Or is it really more so about them driving or working with the salons rather to create those additional sales?
So I'm going to answer your question in two parts, because I think it's kind of two parts. Like, there's the digital piece and then there's kind of like the collaboration piece. So I think the collaboration piece is hugely important from the salon side, right? Because they are small businesses, right? So they typically are not going to have the same budgets around, marketing and driving campaigns and all of those things. And so any type of support that you can offer to be like a true business partner to them, it's going to be really helpful and really driving the business within their salon. And then if they're successful, then you're successful, right? So you, in a way, are, kind of tied to them in a partnership. So I think, what does that collaboration look like? I think usually it's education events. So stylists are a lot of times like always trying to continue their education because we know that like the trends are always changing, right? Like everybody, extensions are huge right now. So everybody's getting certified in, certain extension methods and things like that. Like there's tons of, kind of noise in the space in terms of like what you could be doing. So I think being able to provide education to your salons is super important so they can kind of stay on top of all of the trends. And then that's also, you're going to layer in your products in there, right? So that's going to drive in more product either to their back bar or to their retail. So I think education is good. I think any sort of business support that you offer to small businesses is typically going to be something that they're going to be grateful for because again, they don't necessarily have like those big budgets. And then, a lot of times, like they might not necessarily have a business background, right? Like you might be talking to somebody who was a stylist and then they opened a salon, right? So they understand the creative part of it. They understand how to do hair, how to get guests, but like they might not necessarily understand, marketing and things like that. And so I think being able to offer any sort of business resources is going to be something that's going to be, hugely impactful to their business. And then that's ultimately going to really develop the relationship between the brand and you. And then the other part is the digital piece. So a lot of times the campaigns that you see for the pro brands are really targeted to the consumer, right? And so we kind of get beat up a little bit on this in the salons because they're like, how is this helping the salon business, right? If you're driving them to, a Sephora or an Ulta or what have you. But I would say, kind of in response to that is that consumer awareness and like the brands being in their face is going to help impact the salon business because maybe they go to Sephora and they buy that first product from Sephora, right? But they still have to come into the salon to get their hair cut or their hair colored or, whatever, their silk press or whatever it is that they're doing, right? And that's your opportunity for them when they start saying, oh, like, I got this because I saw it on TikTok. That's your opportunity to like start having the conversation with them about the products that they're using in their hair. And if you're a salon that retails, then that's your opportunity to say like, hey, I think that is a really great product, but maybe you want to try this flavor instead, right? And so it's going to help drive retail. And then you also might have, guests that are coming in and they're asking specifically for that brand, right? Because they've seen it when they were scrolling last night on TikTok. So I think consumer awareness is huge and it definitely impacts the pro space as well.
Thank you for sharing that. That's super helpful. So I'm curious, we talked a lot about the upsides to launching in the pro space. I'm curious if there are any watch outs or any potential downsides to doing business in the pro space, or maybe not necessarily even a downside, but just a difference in terms of what it might be like to work with the salons and the distributors versus working directly with a mass retailer or, again, a beauty retailer.
Sure. So I think just some things to watch out for. The salon industry is always changing. Like we talked about, some of the changes in trends with, some of these certifications that are coming out. And I think especially coming out of COVID, some of the people are being much more intentional about how they're spending their money. So, we're starting to see clients that are spacing their appointments more far apart and things like that. So I think just being aware that the industry is constantly changing. It's not the same salon industry that we saw, 20 years ago or even 5 years ago, before COVID started, right? So I think that's super important, but I think also because it impacts the way that salons are interacting with brands. I work on retail brands, so that's why like I'll kind of talk about retail and salons a lot. But with the retail side of things, we are starting to see, a lot of salons, their retail is not doing as well as it was previously. And I think, some of that is because buying patterns have changed just with like things getting more expensive and, guests might be trying to shop the best deal to our point we were speaking to earlier. Or maybe they're just, trying to get mass shampoos instead of pro to kind of like save money that way. Any number of reasons, right? But I think being able to understand the landscape of the industry is something to definitely watch out for, especially if you're getting in for the first time. And then I think just in terms of like working with a distributor, I think that, you're kind of beholden to the distributor in a way, right? Because they carry, 50 plus brands, right? So they have to be the expert on all of those brands. So how do you make sure that your brand is top of mind when they're going into a salon. I think those are just some things that you want to be aware of as you go into the space.
Thank you for sharing that. And I know we talked, the distributors seem to be a fantastic opportunity to reach a large number of salons.
Mm-hmm.
Are there still opportunities to kind of go like old school sales, door to door, and to just say like, hey, this is a salon that I really like. I have hair products. I don't, y'all. This is just role playing. I have a hair product. I'm a founder and I want to sell this in. Is that something that happens? I know, having worked at, a couple of retailers, I know that folks will sometimes come up to the sales associates and say, hey, I have a product, I'd love to sell this, at Target. And it's like, all those decisions are made at Target corporate. All those decisions are made at the corporate headquarters, not at this individual store.
Right.
So is that similar with salons, or is it different where it's like you could actually have an opportunity to sell in directly, and then maybe you could work with a distributor if you're kind of going door to door, if you wanted to start small? Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you could absolutely, kind of just start salon to salon. I mean, my old brand that I used to work on actually before I came to L'Oreal, that was how they got started. They literally had their, suitcase of products that they had developed, and they went to, salons and they started talking to them about the products, and that's how they got started. And honestly, now they're really big. They're in, tons of salons. They're also in, in some Sephora and some other retailers. But I think what's interesting is that a lot of those salons that they first went into, those salons love that story. And they love to tell you when you come in, they're like, oh, he came in and he just did our hair with these products and we've been carrying the brand ever since, So I think that's one of the things that I love about the pro space is that you're just talking to people, right? And so these salon owners, they're just people like you and I. So you just go in and, they'll tell you about their kids and how their salon got started. And so I think they get super excited to be a part of, the beginning of someone else's journey. So you could absolutely go that route to start building the brand and then decide, later on if you want to go direct or if you want to go with a distributor.
Okay, great. That's really good to know. For the brands that are listening, if they're like, ooh, I don't know if I can afford a distributor, if you have that hustle in you, which many brand founders have, it sounds like you can still do old school and go door to door and do things that way also. So I love to hear that. I'd love just for our last question to just touch on things that you think are opportunities for brands. So we'll say, hair care brands that are present in the B2C space. So for the brands that are selling directly to consumers that might not necessarily be present in the pro space. So again, just wondering what those things might be that brands that are listening can use to potentially, one up themselves as they're selling, or if they do want to consider selling in the pro space.
Yeah. Okay. So this is a hard one, but I think that the one thing that I think is an opportunity, and this might be a tall ask, especially for a brand that's just getting started, but is making just online shopping a little bit easier for salons. We're starting to see some vendors pop up that are offering some, kind of turnkey solutions to have salons set up to be able to ship to their guests. It's still kind of the early stages, at least from what I'm seeing. But I think, if you had some sort of solution where it's hey, we will go in your salon, we'll stock your back bar, we'll help you with retail, all of the things. And then we also have this opportunity where we can help set you up with your online shop. I think that's a really big opportunity because, a lot of us shop online, right? We're on Amazon, we're on, wherever it is, right? And so I think offering that to small businesses, I think it's a really big opportunity.
I love that. I mean, hey, it's one of those things, whoever comes up with it, they're going to be set, That's a really good point. I mean, that's exactly how these things happen. It's oh, this is something that isn't present in this industry, but could be a real, revenue generator for these salons. So thank you for sharing that. Do you have any other parting words to share with the audience as we close the interview? Anything to share with brands that are starting up or might be trying to figure out what areas to target, what retailers to target, or considering the pro space? If you have any tips or advice, anything, feel free to share.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my parting words would be, whatever your, kind of idea is for the pro space, I think there's a lot of opportunity. I think that, there's a lot of legacy brands out there. I work on some of them. They're, some of the most amazing brands. But I think, there's an opportunity for some smaller brands to come in there. Like we go into salons all the time and they are constantly looking for something new and fresh and maybe something that, their guests aren't necessarily seeing in other places. So there's a lot of opportunity, and I'm excited to see where, kind of what the next innovations are going to be in this space.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Mercedes, for joining me today on the podcast and for introducing my audience to the pro space. Again, I think it's an area that has a lot of opportunity, as you shared today. It's just not often sought after. And it's likely because we're consumers, so we think of those mass retailers first. But to your point, many of us go to salons and, we just don't realize that, hey, those products, someone had to sell those in too. So thank you for sharing this with my podcast audience.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you again to Mercedes for joining me on the show today. It was so exciting to learn a little bit more about the professional hair care space and also to learn about what things brands could do to stand out a little bit and to really make a splash in that retail space. As always, if you found this podcast helpful, I encourage you to share it with a friend or colleague, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, and as always, we'll catch you on the next episode. Bye.